Hi there, this is Matt with ot3d.org. This video is part of a series of videos that I'm making designed to teach occupational therapy practitioners, educators, and students about applications for 3D printing in practice. My goal is to provide videos, resources, and instructional templates that will help walk you through the process of using a 3D printer. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at some of the different materials that are available for use with 3D printing. These materials will vary in cost and potential use, so we'll touch on these topics throughout the video. I'll be covering some of the more common materials first, and then we'll venture into materials that are for more specific purposes. Now before we get started, I'd like to really quick give a shout out to all3dp.com. I was able to find quite a bit of information about the price of filament, temperatures, and I'll link that in this YouTube video's description down below so you can have access to that information as well. So I'll be talking a little bit about my personal experience and borrowing some of the information from that website as well. So just to start out, we're going to talk about a material that I am probably most familiar with. So PLA is a material that is the main material that's used by my local makerspace, and you might find this to be true with other similar facilities. So PLA is a material that is very common, can be found online for typically from $15 to $25 for around a 2-pound spool. So PLA prints easily, and it's an excellent material for prototyping and general use items. One thing that you want to consider is one of the strengths of PLA is that it has a low melting temperature, so you're able to print it in most printers, but at the same time that makes it susceptible to degrading if it's left in a hot environment, such as like a hot car. So if you're using this for an item that you're going to give to a client, you might want to warn them like, hey, don't leave this on your dashboard if it's going to be out in the sun, you know. One final thing to talk about with PLA is that you can get it in just about any color. So for customizing things for people, it's easy to come across different colors. I've actually seen sample packs that you can purchase. It gives you just a little bit of a bunch of different colors so you can test them out and see what works best for you. Because PLA has such a low printing temperature, you can actually use it in 3D pens as well, which is something that you might not be able to do with other filaments if you want to do something that's more freeform. So up next, I'd like to talk about a filament that I have a little bit more experience with. This is PET, or more specifically PETG. PETG is just a version of it that can be used in 3D printers a little bit more easily. You might recognize this plastic as being a component of water bottles. It's also used in some clothes and food containers. So some of the strengths of this filament are that its strength is relatively high, it has decent flexibility, and it has really good durability. So we're getting into those ABS-like qualities. But the printing temperatures for this filament are going to be a little bit lower. You can sometimes get away with 220 to 250 degrees. You will need a heated bed on your printer if you're printing with this. The main thing that I've run into when printing in PETG is making sure that you have good bed adhesion. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. I'm personally a fan of the glue stick method, so taking a purple glue stick and taking that onto your heat bed. You can also use blue painter's tape. I've seen some people use hairspray to good effect if you're printing on a glass bed. Just some options to consider. Now, with the higher durability, I like using this material for things like switches, things that are going to be used frequently. One thing that you have to watch out for with this filament is it needs to be kept dry. So a lot of times it's going to be shipped with a silica pack that keeps the moisture down. You might want to hang on to that for storage purposes. And you can also look into things like filament dryers if you're going to be using this in a very humid environment, just to keep the water content down and the filament printing well. So the next material that we're going to talk about is one that is actually pretty common in day-to-day life. It's ABS. So ABS, you might know it for its use in materials like Legos. It has a high strength, around medium flexibility, but really high durability. It's a little bit more difficult to use than PLA, and I'm actually not able to print it with my printer here because ABS gives off fumes. So if you're going to be printing with ABS, you're going to need an enclosure for it, and that's for two reasons. One is to help with the fumes, so you can keep that kind of ventilated. And the second part is just that ABS is a little bit more temperature sensitive, so you need to keep it in that kind of warm environment because it has a tendency to warp when it's cooling down, and that's something that we want to avoid if we're going to have dimensionally accurate prints. The offset is that you are able to have really high durability. It's going to do great for things that are going to be kind of wear and tear products. you have something that's going to be used as like a toy where a kid might be dropping it pretty frequently, ABS might be a really good consideration for you. So the next one that we're going to talk about is TPE, TPU, or TPC. TPU is the one that I have the most familiarity with, but all of these can be described as flexible filaments. So most filaments are pretty flexible before they're printed, but after they're printed they become rigid with like PLA, ABS, PETG, all of those. But with flexible filaments, they maintain flexibility even after they're printed. You might think of them like a rubber. So while they'll only have around medium strength, their flexibility and durability are going to be very high because they can just bounce back like rubber. It's a little bit more difficult to use TPE and TPC. TPU is a relatively easy format to jump right into, which is why I recommend that one in particular. Its printing temperature is around medium, 210 to 230 degrees Celsius, but you don't really have to worry about warping or anything like that, and it's not a soluble material. So overall, it's pretty hardy. These kinds of filaments are going to be great for anything that requires flexibility, a little bit of give. One of my favorite things that I've managed to find that uses this filament is use in prosthetics. So I found a couple of finger-based prosthetics that use this as the base so it can slide over the end of the extremity that's getting the prosthetic. For all of you hand therapists out there that are considering using 3D printers for prosthetics, this is definitely something to look into. Now, if you're going to be printing with this material, one thing that you're going to want to consider is that you will need to slow down the print. TPU is known for stringing. It leaves little strings of filament, and they can be a little bit hard to clean up, so you're going to have to print at a lower speed, so it'll take a little bit longer to do these kinds of prints. I recommend 20 millimeters per second at least on my personal printers. That's what I've had the best success with. So if you happen to be looking for an alternative to ABS, I would highly recommend looking into ASA filament. ASA is going to fix a lot of the problems that ABS has, especially that kind of warpage. One thing that you'll have to consider with ASA filament, despite it being extremely durable, you're going to potentially have issues with layer cracking. So once you get ASA dialed in, it's going to be great for you. It's just one of those things that you're going to have a little bit of practice with, and it's a little bit more expensive. It's going to be up in the $30 to $45 range for a lot of those filaments. But the offset of this is that it's going to be highly UV resistant. It's going to be very heat resistant. It's great for things that are going to be outdoors, but once you're able to get it dialed in, it can be a great filament for a lot of cool purposes. For the next couple of filaments, I'm going to lump them into one category. These would be wood-based filaments, magnetic filaments, metal filaments, and glow-in-the-dark filaments. So with each of these, there's something that's inserted into the filament. With wood filament, you're going to have small pieces of wood oftentimes. Magnetic filament, you'll have small pieces of magnetic material. Same with metal. Glow-in-the-dark, you'll have something that glows in the dark inserted into the filament. The downside of each of these filaments is that they will wear out the brass nozzle because they have those kind of abrasive elements that are within the filament. You'll need to upgrade to probably a stainless steel nozzle or just be willing to replace your brass nozzle on your extruder a little bit more often. These filaments are really cool though. If you have the chance to print with any of them, I would highly recommend it. I can imagine a lot of applications for glow-in-the-dark filament with occupational therapy practice-based needs, especially if you have someone that needs to find something in the dark, of course. So definitely check these out. It might be worth experimenting with, and it might fulfill a certain need that you have with your printer. So that just about covers most of the filaments that you're going to commonly see used with FDM printers. Now that's not to say that there aren't other ones. There are a ton of different kinds of filaments out there, like nylon filaments, polycarbonates, carbon fiber. These kinds of filaments might require specializations made to your printer or a specific kind of printer to use them, but it's still something to look into, and they are all included on the All3DP website, which again will be linked in the bottom of this video. They have a ton of information that's going to be super helpful as far as figuring out what kind of filament works best for your needs in addition to this video. Now, if you have any additional questions, feel free to leave them in the comments of this YouTube video. I'll also be uploading a visual guide to accompany this video with a lot of the details that we've discussed if you want to go back and review those things. And again, all3dp.com has a lot of the information on these filaments, especially the ones that I have a little bit less experience with, so I'll be linking that as well. This has been Matt with ot3d.org. I hope that you found this information helpful, and happy printing!